Welcome, everyone. I'm Tom Saliba from Freeport Speech, and welcome. I'm looking out, I'm seeing a couple of our past speakers here. Thank you so much for everything you've all done for us. They're everywhere. Thank you. We have a new rule. I have a 3-minute limit, so I'm going to make this really, really fast. Most of the information was on the screen and is in your programs. Please take your programs home. There's a lot of future information in there as well. First, a little bit of a poll here. How many people here, this is your first Freeport Speech event? Just raise your hand. Oh, wonderful. Quite a few. That's great. That's great. Okay, and how many here were at Ukraine, either Ukraine 1 or Ukraine 2? Wow. Great, great, great. Thank you. Well, this is going to be a wonderful evening. We've had Susan Thornton and Admiral Johnson, Greg Johnson, in both of our previous Ukraine talks. But this year, we're incredibly fortunate to add to the panel Ambassador Robert Gelbard, who lived through all of the negotiations during the war and after the war in the Balkans. He was really the principal negotiator for the United States. To have that kind of experience here in Maine with us is incredible. And I think my 3 minutes are almost up, so I'll simply tell you the 3 speakers have one thing in common. They all went to school in Maine. Greg is a proud graduate of the University of Maine. Susan Thornton is an incredible alumna of Bowdoin College, and through Susan, we are here tonight. And last, and certainly not least, Bob Gelbard went to that wonderful school in Waterville. Colby, where I also went, and served on the board of the museum with his lovely wife, Aline. Last 30 seconds of my comment, I want to welcome Elizabeth McClellan from Partners for World Health. Elizabeth. Yeah. We first learned about Partners for World Health through Admiral Johnson on our first talk, and are very, very pleased to be supporting them once again this year, and hope that you will all read about all the incredible things they've done in Ukraine and other parts of the world. Thank you, and enjoy the talk.
Well, good evening, everyone. I think I've been elected the sort of honorary Kickstarter of the conversation. And it's great to be back here with Freeport Speech. Greg and I have done this together a couple of times. We didn't think we'd be here 3 years later talking again about the topic of the Ukraine-Russia war, but we are, and we're very happy to be joined by Ambassador Gelbard, my good colleague and new friend from Colby, and we're doing a sharing tonight, obviously, here at Bowdoin, but it's just great to be here at Bowdoin. Again, I was back for my 40th reunion a couple weekends ago, so that was really great to see the campus again and be back here. I think what we wanted to do is kick off with sort of getting the lay of the land on the situation with the conflict in Ukraine, and there's a lot going on, of course, in the world, so I think we'll probably expand our conversation out. We have major diplomatic and former military firepower here tonight, so we can talk dressed alike.
We coordinated.
Yes. They were talking backstage about a trip that Greg made with Defense Secretary Cohen to Indonesia when Ambassador Gelbard was our ambassador in Indonesia. So there's a lot of history and a lot of coverage of the world here. But let's start with Ukraine, and then we can, of course, expand out from there, and we'd really be excited to hear what people in the audience think about what's going on in the world, and happy to have a conversation about that too at some point as we get on in the night. But just to pick up on the the Ukraine-Russia topic, because that is something we've talked about a couple times here now in the past 2 years, 3 years now. And I guess, I mean, for either one of you, the situation on the ground as it stands, it's very hard to follow, I think, the Russia-Ukraine kind of line of contact and what's happening in the war. You get a lot of information from both sides, and it's very hard to figure out the actual sort of reality of the state of the conflict. So I don't know, maybe Grog, if you want to kick off on how you understand where things are at the moment.
Well, the line of control moves a little bit, I think inch by inch. Right now it's moving towards Ukraine and slightly in Russia's favor. But what we have here is really a stalemate, and it's really not going anywhere. And it isn't going to change. It's a basic cost-benefit analysis on the part of Putin. He has a lot more to lose if he loses this war than he has to gain by showing any kind of willingness to negotiate anything that's reasonable. And of course, for the Ukrainians, it's a very, very clear cost-benefit analysis. The only thing that could be worse than what they're being subjected to now is to being under the control of the Russian boot. So they aren't going to budge. And so the only means, I think, for something to change on the ground, other than to sit there and slaughter each other, is for the United States and NATO and the Western nations to come together in more substantive and meaningful ways than they have heretofore. They've done just enough so that Ukraine can't be defeated, but they have not done enough for them to turn the tide of this to get to Mr. Putin to the negotiating table. And I learned a long time ago in this profession that peace, which is the business I always thought I was in as a professional in the military, comes through strength. And we have not exhibited the level of strength we need for this to come out in a more favorable manner. And this began a long time ago after the end of the Cold War, when we lost our deterrent dominance in Europe. We took back 350,000 troops from Europe. We took away substantive deterrent capacity, and Putin watched it all. He watched what we did when he went into Georgia. He watched what we did when he went into Crimea. He watched what we did when we went into the Donbass. He watched what we did when we said we had a red line in Syria and the use of chemical weapons, and we did nothing. And he watched what we did in Afghanistan, and he concluded that he can do just about anything he wants, and that's exactly what he's doing. And so it is only going to change if we, the West and the United States and NATO, do something. That's my 2 cents worth.
Wow.
I agree fully with what Admiral Johnson said, and let me just add some things. The first and most important point is Putin has tried to convince everybody this is about NATO expansion. The truth is this has nothing to do with NATO expansion. Mm-hmm. This has everything to do with Putin's dream about recreating the Soviet Union. He fancies himself Peter the Great. He fancies himself the rebuilder of the great territory that was destroyed by the West. And I think it was most importantly revealed just last week at the St. Petersburg Economic Conference when he said, Ukraine is ours. Russia and Ukraine are one. He never mentioned NATO once. And the reaction when Sweden and Finland joined NATO from Russia was negligible to zero. Now, I fully agree with what Grog said about the fact that when this started, unfortunately, the reaction of the American government in particular was to provide enough military assistance to Ukraine so it would not lose, but not enough so that it would win. There was never an effort to go ahead of the curve, to provide the right kind of artillery, to provide F-16s, to provide other kinds of materiel that Ukraine could have used at the time in a much more aggressive effort. At this point, though, what Putin is looking at is a test of wills. Mm-hmm. Russia has 700,000 troops in Ukraine right now. They are adding 8,000 to 9,000 troops a month. The amount of casualties they've suffered is immense. By the end of 2025, they will have had 1 million casualties. That's killed and wounded. 1 million casualties. And what Putin has done is transform the Russian economy. They have gone through very difficult times. Inflation is high, but he has used all the weapons of the Russian propaganda machine to convince the people this is the second great patriotic war. And he's transformed the economy into a war economy. So they are pumping out artillery and artillery ammunition and other war materiel at a very, very fast rate. They're also getting immense cooperation from China. And the Chinese cooperation has increased, I think, quite dramatically from suspect dual-use equipment to no-question equipment. There's no doubt now the fact that Xi stood next to Putin on May 9th at the great glorious celebration. So the real question is going to be what kind of determination the United States and our NATO allies have as Putin has decided on this war of attrition and just to try to wait out the West.
So that's a pretty grim assessment, but what happened to the diplomatic efforts? I mean, President Trump came in, he thought he had some kind of a connection with Putin, thought he was going to resolve the, this situation, or at least come up with a ceasefire. He's been trying to get a ceasefire. There have been various diplomatic efforts with Turkey. We've had phone calls between President Trump and President Putin. Is it true that what Trump, I think, said on his last kind of reconnoitering about all of this was that Putin's just sort of playing him, tapping him along? Do you think that is a realization that has now come home to sort of shake the awareness of the administration, and now they'll continue maybe with providing some, at least, assistance to Ukraine? Because that's really a huge issue. I mean, we saw recently in the NATO summit, which just ended today, that the Europeans have committed to continue to provide at least some kind of material assistance, some kind of weaponry, but the US had been, up to this point, we're still providing assistance that was committed by the last administration, but the idea was that we were going to pull out all of our assistance from the Ukrainian side. Do you think there's going to be a change now in that, and do you think that will change at all the diplomatic prognosis?
Well, I thought it was going to be solved on the first day.
Well, there was that.
Negotiations, first let me say, the only thing, I've negotiated with the Russians. The only thing Russia understands is strength. They do not understand flattery. Maybe a little bit is useful, but not the kind that Witkoff is using. But they only understand strength. Strength also means leverage. Leverage means providing military assistance. If the Russians know that there's no military assistance in the pipeline, if they know there's no effort to provide additional sanctions, in other words, no more pressure, then there's no reason that Putin will have to capitulate or to agree to a truce, which Zelensky has already agreed to, a complete truce. It will take pressure, and it will take Trump using that pressure, both rhetorically and materially, to get Putin to come to the negotiating table, starting with a complete truce. But until and unless that happens, there's absolutely no reason that Putin is going to do anything but wait the US, the other NATO allies, and Ukraine out.
Yeah, the other side gets the vote. And I don't know why Mr. Trump didn't realize that, but everything, diplomacy and negotiations are quite different than real estate deals. And he's slowly learned his attempt with Gaza, his attempt with Ukraine, that he's gotten nowhere. And so
Tariff negotiations.
Pardon?
Tariff negotiations.
Tariff
As we were
negotiations,
discussing,
yes. And so I think, I don't know if the light bulb's coming on. I don't know if we're engaging in wishful thinking. We've done a lot of that over the last couple of decades, wishful thinking. And we've got ourselves into these very difficult situations. For us to be successful in negotiating, people have to either really like you, admire you, they have to respect you, or they have to fear you. And coming out of World War II, we had a well-earned dominance throughout, and deterrent capacity throughout the world. And we've slowly, frittered that away. And it's going to take a lot to build it back. And so hopefully Mr. Trump is beginning to understand that in his administration. And again, nothing will change here unless we do something very decisive, much greater than what we've done before. They have to have some kind of offensive capability that can put some pain in Mr. Putin. We can do a lot more on sanctions too. I just read something where the amount of hurt that our current sanction structure has put on the Russian economy is actually less than the amount of income that Russia is getting just from our European friends and Western powers that are still buying some amounts of hydrocarbons from them.
Yeah, I don't know if people realize this, that Europe is still actually buying gas and oil from Russia in quite significant amounts.
So what you do, Bob, you must have some information on this, but there's a whole lot more we can do on the non-kinetic side.
Yes.
But I do believe we still have to do something kinetically. And we've got to come up with the will to do that. And right now the West is short on that. And I believe that our European friends are starting to stand up. They're starting to see the seriousness of it. Bringing Finland and Sweden into the NATO has helped a lot, giving them some more spine. But besides this, the Nordics and the Baltics and Poland, there's still everybody. Britain has been pretty strong, but it remains to be seen just exactly how much Germany will do, and France. I think Germany, with the new chancellor, has started to stiffen up. I still don't know about France, and so it remains to be seen. But we don't have forever, because as Ambassador Gelbard noted, these massive numbers, it's just manpower slogging it out in the trenches, essentially. And as we say, Russia's already lost 1 million people, but it has a 4+1 advantage in manpower. And by the way, most of the people that are doing the dying aren't Russians.
Yeah,
they're all the minorities.
Kyrgyz, North Koreans, yeah.
In terms of sanctions, as Grog said, there's a significant amount of hydrocarbons, oil and gas, which is still flowing into Europe. If the Europeans turned off the gas pipelines, that would cut off Russia's ability to export gas, because they're not able to sell any more to China. And there's a good deal of petroleum which is leaving Russia, often through Baltic seaports, and going out through what are called the ghost fleets.
Ghost fleet.
These fleets could be tracked down, and there are ways to deal with them through insurance or withholding insurance and other methods, but a lot of it involves bulking up in I defer to the Admiral, but bulking up in the Baltic Sea.
Yeah. And so this Black Fleet, and that's what's taken the oil to China, and India, who's all too happy to buy it at a reduced price.
I was going to say, as the price of oil goes up, it's going to be harder and harder, of course, to do these kind of sanctions, because you've got to get everybody in the world on board. And if they're facing high oil prices, countries like India are not in the sanctions regime, and a lot of other countries in the global south have not joined. So the sanctions regime, in order to bring more pressure on Putin and have it really work, is going to have to be a much more united coalition of countries. And I don't know if you've heard anything about what the U.S. government's been doing to be friendly to countries around the world lately, but they're not necessarily in the mood to sign up for a lot of our initiatives right now, unfortunately. So the sanctions effort is going to be a really tough road to hoe, I think.
But Susan brought up a good point when she said the price of petroleum going up, but that speaks of sacrifice, and that's something that's not a very marketable product these days. No one is willing to sacrifice. We're scared to death that we'll go back to what it was in the early 70s or something. But I think if we're going to turn this around, it's going to require all of us to sacrifice some, and we may have to pay $4 or $4.50 a gallon for fuel if we're going to turn this thing around. If we think the outcome in Ukraine is important, and I believe it's profoundly important for our peace and security in the coming years. And so I see one of my high school friends sitting there, and we owe it to you to not leave you with a mess that you're going to have to clean up. And so we need to sacrifice. And Western Europe needs to sacrifice, and they need to turn off that gas because, like the ambassador said, the only way that's getting out is through pipelines that come into Europe, and so we're allowing them to, the ships that can carry that to Western, Eastern Asia, load up in European ports.
Go ahead.
Can I just comment on some
Sure.
good news?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
There is good news.
Yeah.
Putin has done a remarkable job of uniting NATO.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look, since I've been so involved in the Balkans, in 1991, when Yugoslavia began to fall apart, famous line from the then Prime Minister of Luxembourg saying, "This is the hour of Europe." Well, it wasn't. The United States had to come in and solve it. And we kept pushing, in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, we kept trying to encourage the Europeans to do more on defense and with NATO. And they didn't do it. And I have to give Trump credit.
Yep.
It's an extraordinary accomplishment to have gotten the European countries to commit to make such enormous increases in their defense capabilities. They have also done, many of them, a great deal in terms of arming Ukraine. Countries like the Czech Republic and even Serbia, which is not part of NATO, Poland, the Baltics, Germany, France, to a certain extent, have done a great deal in terms of helping them. Who would have thought Sweden and Finland would join NATO? Unimaginable for all of us. I was in both of those countries late last summer with a small group, former generals, another former ambassador, looking at NATO implementation. They get it. The Finns particularly get it. They understand what the threat is. They closed their border when the Russians tried to begin to infiltrate people across. And that has created a big shock. They also have now bought F-35s. They've dramatically increased their defense budget. They've created a new defense command in Finland for the region. I mean, this is an extraordinary set of accomplishments thanks to Putin.
Yeah, the British just announced this week that they're buying 10 F-35s. The reason they're buying them, that's the only plane that's being made. In this day and age, they can carry nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, and we need to get serious about it because the issue of tactical nuclear weapons is, I think we've self-deterred ourselves. Every time Putin makes a threat, we back down. And so we need to have some deterrence capacity, and it has to be more than the United States because extended deterrence, which thank goodness the United States did for several decades after World War II, seems to be evaporating. I think it's profoundly important, and if we don't continue to do that, particularly to our Asian allies and to our European allies, the proliferation of nuclear weapons is going to be very serious issue. And when people look at Ukraine and who convinced Ukraine to give up their nuclear weapons after the end of the Cold War, the Budapest Agreement in 1994, the United States and the United Kingdom, and in that agreement to take out their nuclear weapons and give them back to Russia, we said that we would forever have your back. And that didn't last at all. And then we promised them by Mr. Bush in '08 that we would bring them into NATO. The Germans and the French were never going to allow that to happen, and we never really worked to make it happen, and we didn't. And then we had this Minsk Accord after he took Crimea and after he invaded the eastern part of Ukraine. And that really was a sellout. So we don't have a very distinguished past here. And I know this is doom and gloom, but I just want people to understand it so that I think that you'll be willing to do the kinds of things and support the kind of initiatives that may even involve a level of sacrifice on our part if this is going to come out the way we need it. And I think it's profoundly important, because if Putin wins Ukraine, I think it's going to be, as we say, a very bad scene.
So that's a perfect segue to a more maybe optimistic, or at least, positive look at the future. What will it take? What will it take? If we did, say we got everyone lined up on the sanctions, say we did continue to provide Ukraine with both, material support assistance, which it needs, and also military assistance, which it also needs, and the Europeans do their part. What is it actually going to take? I had a conversation with John Huntsman, our former ambassador to Moscow, actually, and Beijing the other night, and he was quite, pessimistic about this becoming another frozen conflict where, and unfortunately, in a frozen conflict, Ukraine's losing a lot more than Russia is. But what would it take? I mean, I've heard people talk about, we'll have to figure out how to, depose Putin somehow, or what do you think the future looks like? I had one Russian who said optimistically that maybe by the end of this year, after this summer offensive, maybe the Russians would be ready to sit down and negotiate. I don't think that's my view, but that was an optimistic, he admitted, view, and he's in Thailand now, not in Russia, so maybe he's not the best place to assess. But what do you think it would take to kind of have this be on a path to some kind of, probably not resolution, because I think, I'll just say for everyone here, and being former diplomats, most Americans think that problems get solved, but in diplomacy, most problems are never solved, they're just managed, and that's good enough. So if we can manage this problem to a point where people aren't killing each other, I think that would actually be a win in my book, but how would we get there?
I think this has to start with stronger political will on the part of the United States. There is, as most people know here, a robust package of new sanctions that the Congress, bipartisan, in the Senate, is trying to push through. It looked as if it was going to move in a positive way, and Secretary Rubio even told his counterparts at NATO it was going to move. And then he flipped at NATO when he gave his press conference. But President Trump seems to have come away from NATO more negatively toward Russia, talking about getting them Patriot defense batteries. That would be an extremely important step, both symbolically, because it takes months to get them to them, and materially. And if the US gets a new package of sanctions through, that would energize the Europeans into doing a similar kind of package. I think that all of those things are absolutely necessary as a way of getting Putin to the table and beginning to get first a ceasefire, and then any kind of movement toward any kind of serious negotiations.
I agree, but I do think that we have to keep putting defensive systems in there, and Patriots are very important because they're just indiscriminate bombing of urban areas and what have you. but we also need to put some offensive punch in there without the restrictions. And you can't, you're going to have to hit it. You're going to have to use force. People are going to have to suffer pain. And I'm not saying that Ukraine should go after just indiscriminate bombing of urban areas, but there's a target-rich environment there that's well within range of just weapons that would only go 1,000 miles, let alone several thousands of miles. And unless we do that, and Europe collectively, particularly the big powers, Germany and France, and the United Kingdom, and I think the United Kingdom would go along with this, if they came out in a strong, strong way, along with NATO, I think the Secretary General is very much in that point of view, but we're going to have to do that. You have to show the will. And the only way I think for that to happen is the United States has to be emphatically with the Europeans, or they just don't have the confidence to do it on their own. So again, I guess that comes back to all of us in this room, because we collectively produce the government that we have running our country now, and so maybe we collectively can talk to those people who represent us in Washington to take up these kind of policies. It's going to be slow, and sadly the Ukrainians are going to suffer a lot more, even if we were to be as forward-leaning as we could possibly hope to be, for there to be a difference on the ground. And that's a lot to ask. They're going to have to go through a summer and another winter, and and maybe in 12 to 18 months we could start doing things that would make a difference. But I do have a lot of hope, and the reality is Mr. Putin has lost a lot. And he's lost, no one ever thought Sweden and Finland would be in NATO. And the sanctions have hurt, but they could hurt a lot more, and we've got to tighten up that. And, I think the president was offering trade deals and that have you, but I don't know of a company in America, particularly a publicly traded company that has some kind of fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, that anybody is going to do business with Russia. So no one is ever going to go in there and do business. I mean, maybe people from China or India might spend money and put direct foreign investment in there, but no one from the West is. And so he's forgone. That's in the rearview mirror. So there are a lot of advantages that we have that have come about that just need to do a lot more, and we need to do it in a much more coherent manner, I think.
Can I ask, because we're going to go to audience questions, get ready, get ready to have your questions, but I have a much bigger picture question. It's connected to the thing that you mentioned about this government that we collectively have put in office in Washington. And we were talking backstage about the apparent lack of any kind of coherent strategy. Mm-hmm. Now, after World War II, as you mentioned, we were like this preponderant force, and the deal seemed to be there that, the U.S. used its preponderant sort of power to put in place this global security umbrella, and the deal was that everyone would kind of go along and support U.S. policies in that realm. And not balance against us when we would provide the security. And that worked very well for the period of time that it did. Mm-hmm. Now we're in this period, it feels like, where Americans, some of them at least, are very unsatisfied with this deal. Mm-hmm. And feel that people haven't been paying enough, that the U.S. has been shelling out too much. Maybe I'm not sure. But anyway, it feels like people have decided that the deal that was the deal after World War II, this bargain that was made about sort of collective defense and the U.S. takes preponderant responsibility, is no longer what America wants. So can you just maybe, both of you, because you've been, I'm sure, thinking a lot about this as I have, what is it that you think America is now wanting, or why do you think this change is coming about? And is what Trump's doing just a lot of Sturm und Drang to try to get our allies and partners to pay a little bit more and then have everything else go back the way it was, and he'll be fine, he'll chicken out, and we'll just have this kind of status quo ante, but everyone will maybe raise their defense spending a couple percent and people will call it a day? Or is there some fundamental change going on? And if people in the audience have ideas about this, I would love to hear it, I'm sure. But I'm curious, the two of you, what you've been thinking.
I don't know how many people subscribe to Foreign Affairs, but the new edition just came out, and the lead article is by someone I used to work with, she was in the Joint Staff as an intern after she got her PhD, Corey Shockey, at American Enterprise Institute. And so you read that article, and it's about this, what we said at the very beginning, the other side gets to vote. And most of the world now, because as I said about deterrence, they either have to love you, they have to respect you, or they have to fear you. Well, no one loves us. Very few countries respect us any longer. And I don't think very many people fear us because we've lost our deterrent capacity. So we have to bring that back. We have to go to the American people and explain this. And the gains that we've had from the liberal international order that we've had since World War II, being the reserve concurrency, for instance, something people don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about, that's profoundly advantageous to us. It allows us to keep our wonderful deficit spending going at a level that's unsustainable, for starters. But if that goes away, and China and Russia would love to see that go away, and the advantages we've had by having a broad coalition of people when we went to the United Nations or what have you that were behind us, all our NATO allies, all of our Pacific allies. But no, we turned off TPP. That was the first thing Trump did in his first administration. Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was not an alliance like NATO, but it was an alliance with all the Pacific Rim countries. When we backed out of that, the guarantee of the United States, extended deterrence, went away. Now they all have to make accommodation with China. In fact, there was just a summit in March with Japan, South Korea, and China. And they're coming up with trade agreements because they have to put that into our calculation because they can't depend on us anymore. So somehow that has got to change. And I think we're going to come very shortly where we're going to wish we had the liberal international order that we started after World War II would come back
Rules
in some
are good, it turns
way,
out.
shape, or form.
Yeah, Bob.
No, we basically created the system after World War II. The IMF, the World Bank, the UN, the World Trade Organization, and on and on. And it benefited American society enormously through all those decades of tremendous prosperity and, for the most part, peace. When there wasn't peace, it was often our own fault. Mm-hmm. But it was a system which was functioning well. The world changed. And there has been much talk for a long time about how and whether it was possible to adjust those institutions or whether new institutions were needed. Out of, and I have to use the word fear, I think, in different ways, the US has been reluctant or very slow to go along with adaptation in those international institutions as other countries and other regions have become wealthier, more powerful, and more relevant. Probably more change in the IMF and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and some of the regional development banks than elsewhere, but certainly not in the UN. And it's reflected in the paralysis in the UN, certainly. As we've seen the rise of China, Brazil, India, many other countries, Indonesia. So I think we need to find some way to really adapt to those institutions. And it's not just the fault of Donald Trump. Democratic presidents were not willing to go along with what's necessary to utilize the World Trade Organization in an appropriate way either. But we're now in a situation where we also have lost, in this administration particularly already, a lot of our mechanisms for working with people-to-people programs. The kind of economic assistance we have, which has been utterly destroyed. The Voice of America and all of its related organizations. other health organizations. And it goes on like that. So we're losing our ability to work with people. I see this reading the newspapers in Indonesia, in Latin America, in Europe. Questions about why the United States has pulled out from sanitation programs, from health programs, from why are we leaving this as an open path for China? And it's always China. Russia, with its paltry resources, is moving into Latin America and has certainly moved into Africa. But we have left an open field, and as all of you know, nature abhors a vacuum. So the question is going to be whether and how we recoup and whether we want to recoup. But these are going to be really important challenges that we need to face, and our Western European friends who share a lot of the same values we do need to face over time and in the short term.
Tom, do you think we should go to questions now?
Yeah. Just one more thing on that. And to do that, you need the leadership that's going to go to the people to advocate for this. And we forgot that talk. And my distinguished colleagues on my right, one of the problems we have is back in the Cold War and after World War II, we had all kinds of schools of international relations, Fletcher School, what have you, started up, and we had nuclear deterrent strategists at that time. No one studies that stuff anymore. We don't even understand what deterrence is and what it means to have deterrence. And so no one is alive that fought in World War II any longer. There are a few alive, but they aren't in positions of leadership anymore. And our attention span in this country is very, very short. And we forgot about all of this. So I think that is another issue that all of you need to be concerned about. And to have distinguished diplomats like this, you just have to be building goodwill and putting it in the savings account day after day after day. When I worked for Secretary Cohen, we would do every quarter, we went to we did 9 countries in 6 days. We went to all 6 GCC states, Gulf Cooperating Council. We'd always stop in Jordan, we'd always stop in Israel, and we'd always stop in Egypt. And we did that every quarter to keep a relationship going. And the same when I worked for General Powell. We were going all over the world, building goodwill and putting it in the bank so you could draw on it when tough times came. And so I just want to put a plug in for our diplomats, and diplomacy, I would like to think, is not dead, and that it's going to come back. But it's a serious problem, and I hope all of you agree with that particular point. Yeah.
Tom, I can. Okay, over here, the blue shirt.
I appreciate the professionalism of this group and the way in which you have discussed the situation. Let's talk about the fact that we have a disastrous leader.
We have a what?
And we have a disastrous leader in charge. Mm-hmm. And what do we do in that situation? I think you're understating the problem.
Well, I don't know who wants to handle that one, but in the
you opened your mouth.
Yeah, in the spirit of extreme bipartisanship, yeah. That's why I use the term we, and we collectively. And Carol and I and all the friends we have and moving around our social circles and what have you, we are sort of in a group where everybody sort of thinks the same. But I come from very rural parts of Maine. Carol lives in Casco, the outer fringe of Cumberland County. And, she lives in a crossover town. So if you look at the election results, they're very, very close, red and blue. It's not like the rest of Cumberland County, which is 75 or 80% blue. And the rest of the state of Maine, outside of York and Cumberland County, is all red. Well, these are all Mainers, and we're all really, really good people. And somehow, we have to learn how to come together. And I think at the very beginning, we were talking about it's just the 10% on the far left and the 10% on the far right that are against supporting Ukraine. So that's 80% of the people that could probably sit down and go to a bar and have a drink together and have a wonderful conversation and mutually respect each other. And part of that is things like the draft and mandatory public service, where you bring everybody together from different zip codes, and they're working on some higher purpose, some higher cause, and they say, well, that person from the Bronx, that minority from the Bronx, and this redneck from, whatever little town in Georgia, they got along just fine, and they had mutual respect for each other, and they came back to their zip code after they were out, and they said, well, I can get along with those people, and I can respect them, even if they have a different idea. And somehow we've lost that mutual respect and what have you. And so, again, I think we have to look in the mirror and use the large we, and we all collectively have to do something about that. And right now, we want to go to our own corners and slug it out. And I don't think that's going to get us anywhere.
Did you have a follow-up? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
Yes.
The question is, we have a disastrous leader who knows nothing about foreign affairs.
Okay.
Please, somebody comment.
Look, I think
Yeah, I think I answered.
we are in a democratic society where I just was reading an article today saying that even if everybody had voted, Trump still would have won. We have elections coming up in a little over 1 year. The Congress plays, or ought to play, an important role in all of this. There's an opportunity to make voices heard in relation to one's member of Congress, one's senators, lots of ways. And I think it's really important to get the word out to members of Congress and affect the elections. Most of you probably are in the 1st District of Maine, so it's fairly obvious already. But as Admiral Johnson says, I don't think it's 80% of the people who support aid to Ukraine, but it's probably something like 60 to 70%. Mm-hmm. It's an overwhelming majority. And I think members of the Congress have to hear the voices of their constituents. When I talk to people in Congress, and I do, they don't hear necessarily from people. Naturally, not surprisingly, I talk mostly to people who are supportive of it. But it's important to get the voices across. So many of these members of Congress are afraid to really go against the president. And I think it's important to get their constituents to tell them what they feel and to make it clear that they're not going to vote for them if they don't support their views. But members of Congress are elected every 2 years. So that comes up pretty fast.
Yeah, Ned from Harpswell was writing to Senator Collins about his feelings. So, hi, Ned. I was just going to say also, you've got people all through the U.S. government. Yes, there's one person there who's a disastrous leader. There are other people around him who may be pretty disastrous as well. But there are a lot of people in that government that are still incredible public servants, and they're there. We see them a lot, and they're there trying to do what they can. The question is, what's the best strategy to try to mitigate that disaster? And I talk to business people, people in government, people like us, out there wanting to do something. Don't be silent. That's the main thing. Don't be silent. Do whatever you want to do, but just don't be silent. Don't sit and think you can't do anything, and don't. The media is another problem, the information environment. Why do we let him absorb so much of the time and energy of our lives in this sort of beautiful world, right? So you don't have to do that, but you can write to your congressman, write to your local, state representatives, do whatever you can, protest. That's what democracy is for, and we've served in a lot of places where you can't do that. So please take advantage of that.
Yeah.
But I was just talking to a congressman today who is very supportive on Ukraine, and he's trying to put together a congressional delegation, in fact, to go to Ukraine. And I said, let me know. I'll do what I can to help. But I think it's important to keep it alive and to keep pushing on this issue, but on all these issues.
The other thing is a lot of the things that he's doing are not going to work out well, and people are going to start to understand that. I think it's already happening.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that is another thing. It takes a long time for bad policies to kind of come out in the wash, but yeah.
Take that off.
Oh, I got it. Yeah.
You got to let Brownie, he was the first one to raise his hand.
Okay,
So
go ahead,
you
yeah.
got your question, Brownie?
Got to get the microphone.
We've got to look out
here.
for the Marines. Right? Yeah, okay.
Here you go. Here's a microphone.
Thank you. What is it, in your judgment, that has prevented the United States leadership, including our military as well as our civilian leadership, from supporting and encouraging the Ukrainian military to go after the launch sites of the drones and missiles, and to the extent that there are manned bombers bombing civilian sites as well as energy facilities in Ukraine. Because the message that I think Admiral Johnson, you delivered very clearly, and others on the stage have chimed in, is that there is an apparent, it's called a fear of escalation, that if we were to encourage that, or if we were to allow it with the weapons that we or the Europeans or NATO provide to the Ukrainians, then somehow Putin will escalate. In my judgment, it would be calling his bluff. But we have been unwilling, we have been fearful of doing what is really necessary to knock Putin back on his heels. And I don't understand it.
Well,
And the postscript is, when the Ukrainians blew up the Black Sea flagship of the Russian Navy, the Russians never acknowledged that it was a Ukrainian attack. They said it was a malfunction of munitions on the ship itself. They lied to the world community. I'm sorry, that's too much of a speech, but I'm really curious why we're such chickens.
well, it's political will.
Yeah.
And the last administration, we got into after Afghanistan, they were behind the eight ball. They never had the political courage to give them offensive weapons. They were scared the price of oil would go up, the by-elections, then the next presidential election. We don't have the political will. And it goes back to several, both Republican and Democrats. It's our nation. Yeah. We've lost the edge, and it's a rough world out there, and you've got to show it. And so I think that's the problem.
Yeah. I agree. There has been a tendency to accept the Russians' bluff. Mm-hmm. And you get this idiot Medvedev every so often allowed out of his cage and making nuclear threats that are nonsense. But as Grog says, several administrations in a row, and most notably the Biden administration, were really timid about their willingness to arm Ukraine and to support Ukraine and to allow Ukraine to take offensive action. So that's why, as both of us said, they were unwilling at first to provide, they only were willing to provide enough assistance so Ukraine would not lose. And they only marginally would increase the ability to support Ukraine attacking into Russia, providing F-16s, and of course the training the F-16 pilots took forever. Now, of course, what we've seen is that the Ukrainians have taken some really bold autonomous action going after some of these bases. I actually know something about what happened that I don't want to relate here, but it was extraordinarily daring, and it was something they produced on their own. But the attacks to destroy the fighter aircraft and other aircraft were really important and could be followed up.
In the summer of when Susan and I did this first Ukraine thing, I'm sure some of you were there for that. That summer, where Russia was still on their heels, still retreating, if we had thrown some offensive weapons in there, and then we lost the advantage, and we self-deterred ourselves. They gave a couple of threats about tactical nuclear weapons, and we didn't want to do anything. We didn't want to take any risk with the carbons. That's why carbon fuel, the hydrocarbons out of Russia, and we haven't put the pressure on our European partners because of our own self-interest. We don't want the price of gasoline to go up. We don't want to have to sacrifice. And so it's these kinds of issues that we collectively, again, the big we, have to come to grips with in the leadership we have.
Yeah, I think there's also an issue with sort of the national consensus on overall U.S. foreign policy. Foreign policy's become a sort of a victim of this polarized political system that we have now. So every issue becomes like a fight. So everything, whether you're going to supply this weapon or that weapon, becomes part of the political dynamic. And whereas it used to be much more that we were sort of had a general consensus of where we were going and what we might have to do in the service of those goals. So I think there's a lot of confusion now in addition to lack of political will. Yeah.
You've done a good job describing the sobering picture of this, what would you say, frustrating experience. And as citizens who care about Ukraine, yes, we should call our legislators and try to address the situation of the disastrous leadership. But there's something else that everybody in this room could do, and that is, as citizens, connect directly with the people in Ukraine. You can volunteer to have English conversations online. I did for 2 years. You can actually visit Ukraine. I was there in April. I'm just an ordinary citizen, a retired teacher. Any one of you can go to Lviv, to Kyiv, to Truskovets. They're beautiful cities. Life is normal there, and Ukrainians would really appreciate, other than the governmental issues, they would really appreciate the concern and attention and participation and admiration, actually, we feel, for what they're accomplishing. So don't just try to let government do it. Direct action. Be citizens. Buy a ticket. Go to Lviv.
Thank you for that.
Okay. I have Joe. I have this gentleman on the aisle, and then I'll come to you, Joe.
Fred, we'll get you.
They're bringing it to you, yeah.
Thank you. I'm the last person to defend the last administration. Is part of the reason we have this administration. But on political will and not doing enough, and I agree with everything both Ambassador Gelbard and Greg have said, but I'm sure the Pentagon wargamed the potential use of nuclear weapons many times over. Isn't it true that in the middle of the first or second time that Putin threatened to use nuclear weapons, that General Milley and somebody conveyed to Putin that if one tactical weapon was used, they would be met with such overwhelming force that they would regret ever touching that button?
Yeah, I think he did make a call. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And is Putin bluffing? I mean, obviously, if he gets to the point that he is going to lose, he may use a nuclear weapon. But I guess my follow-up question is this administration willing to make that same, pass that same message to him?
I don't know if this administration is willing to do it, but I think if he were to use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, the response from the United States would be very strong. And maybe from some of the Europeans that are nuclear powers too. So I mean, look, as I said earlier, I've dealt with the Russians a lot in negotiations. I also had the benefit of learning a great deal from Professor Thomas Schelling at Harvard, and of course I took on game theory from him, and I did manage to get him to be the graduation speaker at Colby. But I mean, the fundamentals of nuclear negotiations and mutual threats is really important. And the idea of one tactical nuke in Ukraine with a response of a lot in Russia is not worth the price that Putin would be willing to pay. And certainly he would ignore Medvedev. Yeah. Putin knows he can bluff these days. And that's why they're doing it.
We're very bluffable.
Yeah.
But even Putin knows that the prevailing winds are from west to east.
Yes. That's right.
That's not a good option for him.
That's why your flight is always faster going in that direction.
Can we have the microphone right in the front here? Thank you. And then I'll get to someone who's in the middle. Okay, yeah.
You got to get to Fred over there too in the blue shirt.
Okay, hi Fred, okay.
Yeah, well, my question has to do with who's in first and who's in second anyhow, so I'm glad I'm in first.
What did you do to your arm?
So with the U.S. already indirectly and directly involved in the Israeli wars, what I'm wondering is there a risk that if that continues to expand, that the U.S. will have to allocate its military and economic resources between those wars to the detriment of the Ukrainians? And also, if that were to happen, I wonder what the economic impact would be on the United States for having to support, two foreign wars at the same time.
We're basically doing that, right?
Well, it would be dramatic, the cost of it, and I think our magazines are pretty bare right now, particularly with anti-ballistic missile, anti-missile capabilities, Patriot standard missiles on our ships and what have you. The arrow system, I know the Israelis are running out of arrows, and so it would be profound. The price of oil would go up and what have you. I don't know how this is going to play out. I will say I do have a bit of maybe an unorthodox view on all of this. I don't like what Israel's doing in Gaza, but I very much like what they did to Hamas. I very much appreciate what they did to Hezbollah. I very much appreciate what they did to help get rid of the government in Syria, and I very much appreciate their strikes in Iran, because no one in the West was doing anything about deterrence. And they actually used some powerful deterrence, and we all were able to, vicariously pick up on that deterrence. And the mere fact that we dropped 12 or 14 big bombs helped us. I don't know if our president was thinking of the strategic importance of that and the deterrent impact of that. He was thinking about grabbing some of the headlines that Israel was getting probably. I don't want to, but it was a very important thing, I think. And so I am actually glad that happened, and hopefully that is the beginning of us having a credible voice when we say we're going to do something, we do it, and that we're building some deterrence.
Yeah, you raise a really important issue.
Yeah.
We were actually discussing this backstage before we began, because what the war in Ukraine in particular has shown is that in the aftermath of the end of the Cold War, the United States shut down a lot of its capabilities for manufacturing heavy weapons and ammunition. The Europeans, of course, did. They went dramatically down. But I think we only have one factory in Scranton which produces artillery ammunition, large size artillery ammunition, 155s, 122s, 120s. We should be having much greater capability because of the possibility of multi-front wars. I mean, leave Israel aside for a second and just think about Ukraine, Taiwan. So we need, just as the Europeans need, to think about enhancing our defense capabilities in some of those areas quite significantly. I mean, as Admiral Johnson said, very interesting that President Trump talked about the possibility of supplying Patriot air batteries to Ukraine because those are a very scarce commodity right now and might have to be taken from Taiwan.
Well, we're taking them out of Asia. We're
Yeah.
taking them from
Yeah.
South Korea.
South Korea,
We
yeah.
have 'em.
Yeah.
All over.
So overall, this requirement or set of requirements really demands much greater production both in the U.S. and in Europe right now.
And I think maybe one of your, the question is sort of how much more tail might there be on this Middle East situation for the U.S.? And one of the things that the Asians are, of course, all worried about is we've tried to pivot to Asia how many times since we've been in the State Department.
Yeah.
This is at least the fourth time.
We
and
get
it's
dizzy pivoting.
It's also not working this time either. So all of the, we've already pulled a carrier out of Asia to move it into the Med, and
Right.
that will continue sort of the draining of we can't be in 3 theaters at once
But
given
the
our
fact that
current
we
capacity.
did something with a kinetic weapon
Yeah,
has a
that's,
big impact on the calculations that China's going to make with regard to Taiwan. So I think that was profoundly important.
okay,
And
Fred,
I
and
should
then
say
this woman.
one other thing that's not exactly related to this though, but China is really watching what happens in Ukraine. I mean, this is really, really important. They are watching because they're an actor. They're watching both because of the issues in Taiwan and related areas around Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, but also because they are a major shareholder in Russia right now. The relationship has switched. Russia is now a dependent state of China to a significant degree, but they're a shareholder. They're an active shareholder and a large shareholder. So they're watching to see the resolve of the West.
Okay, we've got Fred with a microphone, and then I'll come to you right here.
I was just going to say, the gentleman in the front row asked my question, so
Oh.
I'll pass.
Okay, all right, over to
Joe.
the lady here in the middle. Yeah.
Thank you so much. 2 things. One, both of you said if we were to, in effect, change our minds and go for it in terms of supporting Ukraine, that would still be a year and a half from now in order to ramp up. And I'm wondering why that has to be if we manage to pull together those bombers from Nebraska all the way to the Middle East and back, et cetera, et cetera. Why would it take a year and a half? That's one. And are we going to go for, or what do you think about getting back the territory, the Donbass from 2014? You know, is this just an impasse and Ukraine's still going to lose all that territory, or do we want to go after it?
Well, first of all, I think the best we can hope for now, first of all, we could provide some offensive weapons to them. And we're not going to send B-2 bombers over Russia. That's never, ever going to happen. And
Isn't
I don't
the
think it
difference
should.
that we're providing with kind of conventional weaponry,
Yeah.
low-end kind of stuff,
But-
which we don't make as much anymore, but the high-end stuff that we send to
Yeah.
Iran, we
So
do have
offensive
that
weapons
sort
that
of-
can
it's not using
strike
that.
targets deep in Russia. We could do that much quicker. And we have some of those weapons. And so don't the French, so don't the Germans, so don't the British. And they have provided some to them with, I think, actually fewer restrictions than we've put on
Yes.
the ATACMS, for instance.
Yes.
So there are things that we could do. We just have to have the political will to do it. And
No.
well, no, those things could be done much quicker. But
A year and a half would be things like Patriot anti-aircraft batteries,
Batteries.
which need to be found, but things like artillery shells, that can be done.
But not by us. We're getting them from other places right now.
Yeah, yeah.
And it costs us, by the way, $30,000 a round, where Russia gets them, can make them for $3,000 a round. And they're shooting thousands of them a day.
But we buy them from other European countries or others at lower cost too.
Yeah,
Much lower cost.
buying from
Russians
South
are getting
Korea.
them from North Korea too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
High quality.
Yeah,
Very
high
high
quality.
quality.
I think the other part of your question is about what would the diplomatic shape of a solution look like, and I think in the near to medium term, you're going to have this frozen along the line of contact and along kind of negotiation, whatever that would look like in a best case scenario.
But you
So,
would have you want to have a truce.
yeah,
something
you want to
like
have a real
Korea.
ceasefire. Yeah,
And so that we haven't turned it over.
no one would recognize
You
it as
have a
part of Russia.
ceasefire, and that's why Putin doesn't want a ceasefire in place. And then you start negotiating, and it could take years. And hopefully the West would build up, and NATO would then have till 2034 or whatever to get to their 5%, and we'd have a much more credible voice by then, and we could negotiate. But I don't think the best we can hope for is a ceasefire in place to start with.
Okay, we have that, and then we'll come to you. So in the center here, yeah. I don't know. Can you get him the microphone? Yeah. In the gray, is it gray shirt? Can't really
Yeah.
see.
Yes.
Susan, you got to pay attention. He's a Bowdoin graduate. So
I'm sorry.
So a devil's advocate question. You all here in this room, it's clear what your views are, a bunch of effete liberals, Easterners. I'm a farmer in Nebraska. I'm a dairy farmer in Minnesota. I'm a potato farmer in Idaho. Why the hell do I care about you? I mean, it's sad. It'll be sad, but why do I care what the result is? But for that matter, why do I care about Taiwan? Why do I make the case to me, a farmer in Nebraska, as to why I should care about any of this?
Well, I'm a farmer in Lisbon, and let me tell you. Do you know where a lot of my soybeans are going to be sold? They're going to be sold, to foreign countries. I'm going to be shipping them out of the West Coast ports, East Coast ports, maybe through the Black Sea. I have soybeans coming from Ukraine that are competing on the international market. We have oil prices that are going to be relevant in this conflict. But we also have what we were talking about earlier, which is the thing that farmers don't understand maybe and think about every day, but which is this post-World War II collection of allied partners of the United States, which allow us to provide collective action for all kinds of ills that are out there in the world that you don't think about every day, right? I mean, who's going to partner with us to block terrorists from coming in and blowing up, your municipal building out there in Nebraska or wherever it might be, Oklahoma City, something like that. Who's going to help us to ward off pandemics coming from Africa? Because if they get out of where they are in Loco, then they're going to come here. Who's going to help us trying to secure the borders and the maritime shipping lanes so that your products can get to market? I mean, these are all things that the U.S. does with its partners and allies. It's a collective effort, and if we're not supporting that kind of a security system, you see exactly what we're getting right now, which is the whole world going on fire and falling apart. And that unstable kind of, sort of diffusion of power throughout the world is not going to serve you well.
Why should I, the farmer in Nebraska, believe that? You told me a story about Vietnam. I mean, how important it was not to lose Vietnam. Now we got a new place where it's very important not to lose it. You made a pretty abstract argument there, and it ain't helping me grow wheat.
Well, you're already losing a lot of your exports because of tariffs and...
that ain't Ukraine. That's a different issue.
No, it's not. Because these are global markets. The United States can't seal itself off. As Susan says, oil prices go up, fertilizer prices go up, all the input prices go up, markets diminish. You're going to suffer. You're already suffering.
And the bank's going to take your farm.
And you're going to enlist in the Marines.
Sir, you right there.
You went over this kind of quickly at the beginning in several of the remarks, but less than a week ago, the President of the United States, and I'm no big fan of him on many occasions, but I understand how he will express his victory laps and so on. But he also went to NATO, and I listened to the several hours when he was there. And I wonder if you believe that anything meaningful came out of that, because it stands in big contrast to how he harassed the European allies that we've traditionally had. I say this in a perspective, I'll try to be very quick. In April of 1969, I was a lieutenant in the United States Army. I had just arrived in Germany. And less than a month after I had settled into quarters, the phone rang at 4:30 in the morning. And the statement was, we're going to the field, be here in 20 minutes, and we're leaving with you or without you. This is not an exercise. It was August of 1969.
Yeah.
We went there, and 8 hours later, we were on the Czech border because the Russian tanks had gone in. The Russian liaison officers followed us, monitored our frequencies, and did a lot of other things. But the fact of the matter is, 6 months later, we moved a division of the United States Army from continental U.S. to send the signal that force is going to be used if it has to be used. Nobody here has said anything about and I can understand why, but I really think we should cut through it. Trump did do something. People came through. You recognize that, but I don't sense there's any reason in your minds right now to think this is more real than you realize.
Oh, no, I have to disagree.
Yeah.
I believe this was a historic moment if it turns into reality.
Yeah.
And again, I've been through this, we're about the same age, I've been through this with the Europeans repeatedly. I think in many ways this is finally the wake-up call they needed, both because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which was a tremendous shock to them, and because of what Trump has done. The fact, again, that Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, 80% of the Finnish population support NATO entry. That's stunning. The fact that they are taking measures that we have never seen in our lifetimes, both before the end of the Cold War and since the end of the Cold War, is stunning. They are running scared.
And they should be.
And they should be. I mean, Ellie and I spent 4 years in Paris dealing with the French on all these issues, and their efforts to be in and be out of NATO at the same time, they're in, even though they continue to play word games. The change in Germany is dramatic and, as Admiral Johnson said, seems to be real. When I talk to friends in Europe, in a variety of countries, there's a kind of shock that's taken place, not because of Trump, but because they saw what Russia did. They never imagined this would happen. And this is really important, the question in their minds is, who's next?
Yeah.
Is it Moldova? Is it one of the Baltics? Is it Finland? Who's next? And so that's why, in addition to Trump pushing on a slightly open door, I think this is really, really important, and I give him a lot of credit for it.
One quick follow-up. There was a really important article in the Economist magazine talking about that event that I spoke to, that I witnessed personally 8 hours after the phone rang, and we realized we were going to the Czech border. And the point was made. Chairman Mao in China was vociferously critical of the Russian invasion of the Czech Republic. We do not have that, and you do correctly really underscore that. It's the absence of that if this is going to be real, and I'm not convinced it will be real with this president, but if he gets it and has a learning curve, then it's going to have to be addressed, because I do believe the simple statement, Taiwan is not just a hypothetical condition. And we're either going to have a learning curve in this administration, or we will all live to regret it.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope this is an inflection point and not wishful thinking. And as the ambassador said, proof will be how it plays out. And some of the rhetoric is changing. People can't wake up one day and say, I was wrong. You know, we're going to go this way. It's going to take a little bit of time to walk off the cliff you put yourself on. And hopefully this is an inflection point. And he does deserve an incredible amount of credit for bringing up the NATO. I remember in the early 90s, at the end of the Cold War, going with General Powell, we were talking to the allies about the same thing. You need to spend more money. Same with Secretary Cohen. You got to spend more money. 30 years later, we're finally getting some results. So hopefully it is a real, genuine inflection point.
Can I just also mention, if you're talking about leadership, Mark Rutte, the new NATO
Yes.
Secretary General, who's the former head of the Netherlands,
Yeah.
did an incredible job, masterful job. And so to the person who asked about, what do we do with this leader that we have, watch what he did and do that. I mean, they were criticizing him, saying he was, flattering Trump, whatever. They got this 5% number. Is it real? We don't know. But Trump was going to pull out of NATO. He was going to pull our troops out of Germany, and he's not going to do, I personally don't think he's going to do any of that now, and I really hope he's not going to do anything like that on the Korean Peninsula or in Japan either. So I think there is movement here. Now, whether he was ever going to do it or not, or it was just a campaign slogan, we don't know. And what he's going to do tomorrow, we don't know. But that was quite a masterful handling of a meeting, a multilateral meeting. And Trump hates these meetings, so he was really quite impressive to watch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I couldn't
Thank
see
you.
you over there. Sorry.
I'm hiding behind the podium
yes,
here.
Yes.
I very much appreciate the collective expertise that you presented today. I heard what you said about the relationship between power and peace, and I respect that. I also think education is just as important. And the potato farmer makes a good point. Why should he care? He just wants potatoes. But he needs to be educated. And how do we disseminate, how do we address that need other than through groups like this? We need to do better. And at advising our people as to why we need to sacrifice, for example, pay more for gas. The second prong of my question is, would you explain to me the rude, embarrassing treatment that Zelensky received at the White House? I don't understand from a diplomatic standpoint, and I'm naive when it comes to that, but I do not understand what went on. I was humiliated personally. I thought Zelensky handled it beautifully, but it just made me sick. So
I was personally humiliated, so
Thank you.
I can't explain that. I can't answer that question.
That wasn't diplomacy, I don't think.
Yeah.
Was there any rationale for that at all?
No, I don't know.
I think that there's often a tendency on the part of the president to try to treat these things like a reality show.
It's The Apprentice.
He plays to an audience.
Yeah.
He did this with the president of South Africa
Yes.
appallingly, and I was tremendously ashamed at that too. And this goes to the point of that Admiral Johnson raised before, the question of the role, the image of the United States in the world, the role of the United States in the world. We are losing dramatically the kind of respect we have had before. And these are the kinds of things which dramatically accelerate the decline, the angle of decline in that respect. So it's just beyond belief.
And again, it's educating people. How many people are going to Fletcher? How many people are going to Woodrow Wilson School? We need the strategists like your friend Dr. Schilling to help us in this. We've just lost this whole culture, and so we got some challenges. I'm very hopeful. I really hope that we've come to an inflection point. And what can we do? Well, we got a full house here tonight. Practically all of you came out because you're interested in this issue, and that's important. And keep doing this and keep talking to your friends on both sides of the aisle, and maybe we'll make some progress. And it may show itself come November of 2026.
One other point. My wife, Aline, often talks about the fact that the teaching of civics in our schools has declined dramatically. This is really, really important and goes, I think, to your point.
Yeah, responsibility of citizens in a democracy, right? I mean, it's not just whether I have potatoes and get cheap gas.
Yeah.
The great part of my job is that I get to ask the last question. And so my question is for all three, if you could each talk about this. And Grog called it an inflection point, and I also use the word momentum. And momentum shifts are really, really critical. So my question is, what do you think would be a major momentum shift now, or how would you bring about a major momentum shift now as the attack that the Ukrainians did on their own in Russia was a huge momentum shift at that time? Is it the supplying of Patriot missiles? Is it, well, I'll just ask each of you to comment on that.
Susan?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a momentum shift in the war in Ukraine with Russia, I mean, I think the support from many, many other countries for Ukraine has to really ramp up and be evident and be consistent. And the U.S. has had a serious problem in our consistency, but Europe has been really consistent. And I think if we show that we will be firmly consistent behind Ukraine, that we're not going back and forth, that we will supply these weapons, then I think that will dent the calculation that Putin has made that we will just continue to dilly-dally. And I think that's what we'll need for a momentum shift. You need to see a lot more collective will on the part of the international community, especially, including the U.S., especially the U.S. at this point.
Coming out of the NATO summit, there is tremendous opportunity to take advantage of this momentum shift which occurred there. Very, very positive. But it needs to be followed up on both with symbolic and real signs. Symbolically, I think this would be the right time for the president to come out and push Putin very hard, more than just inferences, about the need to accept the idea of a complete truce within 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever, pick a figure, and in real terms to come out positively about both Patriot missiles, Patriot batteries, and continued resupply of an arms package that would go to the Congress immediately, and finally a willingness to support the bipartisan Russia sanctions package, which the Senate has been preparing for a number of weeks.
Yeah, I would agree with both of my colleagues. I think, I would love to see the president have a fireside chat and say, I came back from the NATO summit and this is important stuff and this is what our country needs to do. That probably won't happen, but hopefully there'll be the kinds of actions so that it'll slowly convince the American people that we need to do something. I think it's as obvious as your nose on your face, even to the, potato farmer in Aroostook County or the farmer in Nebraska, that, in this day and age, in this economy, globalization, whether, the knee bone's connected to the leg bone and the leg bone's connected, it's all connected. And you pinch someplace, it's going to hurt everybody. The world is now too interconnected. I'm in the maritime profession. We are Mahanians, not McKinders, and we believe in mercantile and world, globalization and trade. That's why we have a Navy. Free lines, SLOCs, sea lines of communication. And so hopefully we'll go back to that. And I think that the incredible wealth that our economy and our country has enjoyed over the last 40 years, if we don't go back to that, we're going to lose it.
Amen to that. Great.